Uh, Hi, thanks for coming by, Danielle and Rubes.
Hello.
How are you guys doing today?
Hey, thanks for having us.
You guys are both in New York City, like I am, right? Kind of
Yep.
on lockdown.
Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
Greenpoint. Danielle, you're in Brooklyn, right?
Brooklyn as well, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of weird here these days. It's hard to go outside and stay 6 feet away from people, but I'm glad that we can get together on these webinars and talk about some touring stuff and live music production stuff because I know we're all looking forward to getting back to doing shows soon.
Dying
So, yeah. All right. So, well, thanks to all the attendees for stopping by. There is a chat box open. Please feel free to use that. I do like to have people answer a quick question at the beginning of these webinars. So if you could tell me what song you like to use to tune a PA system with, pop it in the chat box and let's get a list going. This is pertinent because we are going to share a Spotify playlist that has all these songs on it eventually. So share them with us, and we'll get a Spotify playlist going on with songs we like to use to tune the PA system, and we'll talk more about doing all that stuff later. So first of all, let's talk about phase aligning inputs. This is a very exciting topic. I've been looking forward to talking about this one. It's really interesting just thinking about phase and how it all works with our inputs and outputs. But obviously when we're talking about speaker systems and installs and all that stuff, phase is really important on the like the sound design and using smart to tune a room and all that. But it matters a lot on the inputs too, right? So let's jump in and talk about maybe first of all treating a bass DI and a microphone. Can we just jump into that? Rubes, you want to give us maybe some tips?
Sure. Bass or guitar, I'm a big fan of dual sources on those DI microphone or two microphones. And one of my first approaches is to take some pink noise, generate through the amp, and just take a look or a listen at where things are, and then position my microphone around it accordingly. Danielle has been my microphone pusher around at Bowery on many shows. Thank you for that. And that's how I start.
Right, so you run pink noise just from an external pink noise generator through the amp.
Yep.
And then
usually my phone, and just take the 1/8 inch out because I still have one of those, and 1/4 inch in the amp, and yeah, just let that run and annoy everyone's eardrums for a couple minutes while that's blasting in a room. But it's crucial to getting an understanding.
Gotcha. So then, how do you go about aligning the microphone to the DI source?
Well, it totally depends on the console. So in the digital realm, if I have a Pro 2, I'm a big fan of their input phase rotary, that little 4-channel dual input source thingy-majigger that they have. Waves in phase plugin, huge, or just if I don't have any plugins at hand and I'm still digital, just using input delay. It's very fortunate to be in that situation, because in the middle of a mix you could start moving things if you're like, I don't like where that is. In analog world, it's you can't really run up on stage and move it an inch away, or you probably shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, Danielle, you're the production manager at Bowery Ballroom, and you have an analog Midas console in there, right?
We do. So it definitely throws it back to more of the traditional technical hands-on approach. So using your ears and using your hands. We are lucky enough to have some amazing stagehands as part of the team, and we will often call on them or the monitor engineer, whoever's closest to the stage. And we do. You use your ears and you do it old school. For me, it is a subtractive method. So what I will do, either with a bass DI or mic, if it is a bass DI and mic, I'll flip the phase on the bass mic, and either with some pink noise or with the musician playing, figure out where it sounds the worst, where I'm getting the least amount of fidelity, just where the low end is totally gone. From there, as I'm doing this, I'm moving the mic around a little bit. I like to keep the mic on axis and as close to the amp as you can. And again, in most situations, it's to prevent bleed. But yeah, go for where I can't hear the low end the way that I want, and then I know it's right. And then at that point, I'll go ahead and put the polarity on the bass mic back. And usually everything kind of comes together.
Yeah, I find that definitely flipping the polarity on one channel, especially with two guitar mics, helps me line it up. I feel like that's great. If you can really get them to completely cancel out, like 100% cancel out, and then you flip them back, you know it's going to be in pretty good shape, right? So I mean,
That's usually my move. Yeah.
yeah. So I definitely feel like I do a lot of dual guitar sources with a ribbon mic and like a 57. And really, if you notice that if you move the diaphragms back and forth, they're definitely going to cancel out in different ways. And playing with that stuff really does matter. You got to get hands on with that.
Yeah.
So Rubes, do you have any when you're dealing with guitars, your dual input, what's your kind of go-to way of capturing guitar sounds with two inputs?
Well, it depends on what the artist wants. What are they trying to achieve with their sound? Certain times require like a nice big mono guitar punchy sound where I will do that full out of phase, find where it cancels, flip it, and you get this nice big mono sound. Sometimes I want to steer, like in phase steering a PA system, to drive into certain areas, sort of like line arrays do. You can use some delay to sort of steer off. I'm a big fan of like 10 and 2, driver's hands on the steering wheel, panning out guitar signals like that. And you can play with the phase to sort of make it feel a little bit more shifted like that. That can also give you an atmospheric feel in the guitar solos, so they kind of exist up here, as well as give you a lot of dynamic range, giving you the space for the dynamic range in your mix.
Right.
So,
yeah. So if you're adjusting phase, you would use a plugin or whatever, and just slightly, you would go 10 and 2, keep one totally in phase, and the other one just kind of slightly start to turn a little bit.
Find the spot that I like where it's like not completely in or out, but it's enough to steer it off to the position of the stage that they're in or something like. However, you must always check your mono mixes when doing this. If you got front fills that you're matrixing, if you have your bar feed that you're matrixing, always look ahead and check your mono mixes when you're doing some funny phase steering.
Yeah. Danielle, can you talk about the Bowery Ballroom system and any phase issues you kind of think about with that in that room? I mean, it's kind of it's all point source in that room, right? So how do you do you have any special mixing tips for that room where you have to think differently than if you had? I mean, with a line array, the phasing can be a little more accurate, I guess.
Right, and definitely nuanced.
Yeah.
Where again, a point source box doesn't sort of give you that. It's a wider coverage, a little more of a larger field per box than what a line array would do. And we have 5 zones for our little rock club. So it is a bit of a challenge. You do have your main left and right system, the center cluster, and the front fills, which Rubes was talking about. Again, you have to keep that in mind when you think about matrix mixing, because the center cluster and the front fills are in mono as well. That being said, I've certainly done some creative mixing there and seen other engineers really take advantage of that, where the vocals can be right up the center and your left and right mix can get really textural in terms of panning and in terms of opening up that space, while keeping your center cluster just sort of your power for getting the vocals on top of the mix, or getting the key elements on top of the mix. So if you're treating it like double miking a guitar, I've seen people experiment with hard panning left and right to see what happens, to really open up some space, or doing a bit of both, panning left and right, also sending a bit to the center cluster, just to fill it in. And it's definitely a different approach for a rock club, but it offers a bunch of creativity there.
I mean, it helps that the room sounds great there, right? I mean, it helps
architecturally. Yeah, first and foremost, the soft ceilings, and that's something I always look for when you're doing any sort of small club or small format mixing, is soft ceiling, soft surfaces for absorption, and Yeah, the club has always sounded great. We're a bit short, so you know, with myself and D&B, it seemed like point source was the solution, and ending those extra little bits to kind of fill in some zones that need it, because we do have a balcony and we do have, bars in the back area of the club. It helps engineers get creative in terms of the matrixing system and in terms of what you want to send to what speaker.
Yeah, that's interesting because we talk a lot about panning or not panning in live sound. I know a lot of engineer friends I know it's just like down the middle because you don't want to put something in one side of the PA and not have the other side of the room hear it, right? And in a lot of venues that's really the case, but with point source boxes where you have more of a display for each side and just you're kind of just hearing in that size room, you're just kind of hearing the stage more anyway. Yeah, creative panning definitely can be a bigger part of your mix. So yeah, and yeah, that Rubes, would you treat inputs a different way, mixing in a size like a Bowery Ballroom size club versus like an arena?
No, actually, not really. Same thing, a nice healthy gain stage, get it sounding, get it mixed together like you want it to sound like. I mean, I put my in-ears in and I could be in a room and mixing for this room, like, wow, this sounds great. And I'll listen to my mix in the headphones, like, wow, it's, we're mixing for the room. So I start with the same approach on each input, and then I try to treat the room accordingly, if that makes sense.
Right.
Mixing for the room.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I talk about this sometimes, maybe like inputs maybe stay consistent from show to show, room to room, and outputs of the console change depending on the room you're in.
How I want the room to react.
Yeah. Even though I guess, yeah, you're right. The mix will change depending on which room you're in, how much of the stage sound you can hear, how much sound reinforcement you're doing compared to actually just creating the whole mix. Yeah, definitely good stuff to think about. So as far as, I want to go back to the DI and mic thing. Are there any, first of all, do you have DI preferences? Are there any ones that you like the best? I mean, I always use JDI radials.
Yeah, I've got one of the Neve active DIs I like a lot on acoustics and bass guitars, and the Palmer DIs I use between power and cabinet sources on my guitars. I haven't used the Neve for that purpose yet. I've heard it sounds great. I guess I just got to do it. Danielle, what do we? When can we get over to?
I know. Let's experiment. Big open venue.
Yeah, I mean, we could be on each side of that console and still be 6 feet apart.
Very true.
Socially responsibly distanced mixing. Yes.
Yes.
Well, maybe we'll go over there and do some videos at some point. But are any of these DIs? Do any of them have kind of like built-in things to help with phase alignment? Or are you always doing that at the console when you're really trying to?
I'm doing it on the console. Not a big fan of having that control on the box. Obviously, it's nice to have it on the box for various reasons, but I try to keep that all flat so I have the control of what's coming out of the PA, or knowledge of. I mean, if DI can get flipped and you don't know it, what's going on right now? And simple fix of flipping your phase on your end, but it might have taken 30 seconds for you to figure that out, and that's a long 30 seconds in the middle of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, when we go on tour, I always take the buttons out of the DIs, actually, so that
smart.
You can't actually hit it unless you have like a pen.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You can throw them in the mic box at the end of the shows or whatever, and they just kind of roll around. You know, it's pretty fine.
I'm totally gonna do that to all my.
I like that trick. Yeah.
Let's do a little question and answer. You guys have any questions about phase alignment? I know it's a huge subject here, but I know we're kind of focusing on inputs specifically, but please post any questions you have. So I guess phase alignment with between vocals and drums, I mean, other ambient sounds. Are you ever trying to think about that sort of thing? Like people ask me all the time, should I flip the phase of the vocal mics, compared to the, people ask me if I should flip the phase of the vocal mic because they think it helps with the sound of the drums coming through the vocal mic. I often tell them it doesn't make a difference at all, but maybe I'm wrong. Do you ever play around with anything like that, or anything beyond just the 2 input sources on 1 input?
Drums all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Do a lot of drums, especially if I'm going ORTF behind the drummer's head. I'll delay all of the drum inputs to those overheads, and then I flip my phase accordingly. I don't flip the snare bottom, I flip the snare top because I'm flipping that to the heads. So I do that stuff a lot. That's a lot of fun.
So you'll play around with the phase alignment between overheads, snare top, and snare bottom.
All of the drums. I'll delay all of the shells to meet where the overheads are in certain occasions.
Okay.
Obviously.
And then take that and then delay it to the PA, or?
Well, then that all depends on how I delayed to backline. If I'm delaying my PA to the backline, then I'm going to be a little less heavy-handed with how far I'm aligning those headphone overheads to the toms. If I'm not so concerned with aligning the PA to the backline, if that isn't posing much of an issue, then I can go all the way to the overheads. But all of this works with the digital console or the toys to kind of tweak that.
Yeah, but you would do that by delaying, right? Or
input delay or waves in phase is a fun tool if you have the Avid desk.
Can you talk more about that plugin? I don't use waves ever, so I'm not familiar, but
it's a really fun plugin. You can use it in a lot of different ways, but I 100% of the time, if I'm on an Avid desk, I have that with me. I throw it in, and that goes right on my bass DI, bass mic, that whole thing. And it's the same thing as using input delay, except for you have the visualization of where the choralization is, as well as you have 2 points that you can turn off the phase flip filters. So each frequency is going to react differently to its phase relationship throughout. So if you just flip everything 180, 20 hertz might have been in phase where 180 is not, as where 2000 is, or so on. So you have 2 points that you could flip those or remove those from the phase flip. And that adds just another tool.
Great. So what I used to do in the studio sometimes is, like measure out snare to overheads and then do the corresponding feet delay.
That's a big one at Bowery for sure, or on an analog desk, or just something, that I'll do if I'm doing double or triple duty and also have to do the patching on the stage. Or just generally with drum overheads, if I'm going overheads versus underneath the kit, always either measuring tape or a shoestring or a mic cable, and just go from the center of the snare to each of the overheads, and it should be that same distance.
Yeah, you can really kind of get that snare sound perfect. If everything's in phase, it makes a big difference for sure.
Yeah.
So, so you would actually do that with toms too, Rubes? Yeah, everything?
Yeah, I have a laser to measure the distance, although I will admit the first few times I used it, I got bad results, and I didn't realize that the laser was measuring from the back of the laser, not the front where the laser comes out. So I was like 4 inches off of all of my measurements for the first few shows. It isn't working. Now that I know how to measure things. Got it.
What desk do you usually carry when you're out on tour? And can you talk about who you've been touring with a little bit, Rubes?
Sure. Lots. I've been touring with Billy Bragg, Helmet, The Faint, handful of bands. I really never carry a desk, actually. I've had 2 tours that I've gotten to carry a desk. With Billy, there's no reason because it's just 4 inputs, guy with a guitar, microphone singing. And then other stuff, just budgetary. I love them all, though. I really don't know what I'd pick.
Well, it's sometimes just like, to me, having the tools that I like having the plugins I like, makes a big difference. So the ones I like, I'm usually using on an Avid desk. It's kind of the only place to use them. So yeah. But yeah, it's a lot of times it's about having the tools to do those little tricks, being able to say, I want to be able to do this one specific thing, and I know this plugin works really well for that, and that helps me get the mix.
Yeah. It's all a fun puzzle. Lots of different ways to put it together.
Yeah, totally. Following up on a couple of these questions, any input phase alignment on choirs or orchestral stuff? I don't even know how that would really work. How do you guys mic choirs? Do you have a
Usually
go-to?
apart. And as many microphones accordingly, spaced 6 feet apart. And then if you have tiers, a couple. I've never had any issues with phase with that, but it's really such a small element in that. That makes sense. They're so far from the mics too. It's more of this background thing. It's not so upfront that you're going to notice massive phase shifts like you would guitar, where your microphone is literally inches away from the cone.
Yeah.
I know. I think, Scott, you said it with its sound reinforcement at that point, especially with choirs or orchestral instruments. They naturally kind of resonate on their own. So my approach with that is, to reinforce what the instrument has coming out of it naturally. And yeah, I think the 3-to-1 rule applies for bleed, where, extra mics need to be 3 times the distance from the mic whose source you're trying to capture. So that's one that I always kind of
Sorry, can you say
follow.
that again? Can you say that again? So the 3-to-1 rule?
Right. Where if I'm miking up a violin or something like that, then the mic on the cello should be at minimum 3 times the distance away between, the mic on the instrument that I'm trying to capture. Gotcha. And that bleed tends to help a lot. And yeah, I think Rubes kind of said it because that's never entirely been the main focus of the mix. I wouldn't necessarily delay elements of the orchestra to each other, but maybe in a larger space, delay those elements to the backline or something else on stage, some main reference point that we're trying to go for.
Well, that question was posed by Alice from a buddy of mine. So maybe he can elaborate on that if he has something else specifically he's talking about. But let's take this question from Jade. How do you measure the amount of milliseconds to delay the drums by? And how does this translate to how you treat the delay on the remaining stage sources? So we did talk about the delay from the snare to the overheads. And then how would that relate to the rest of the stage sources if you're trying to delay everything to the PA or delay the PA back?
Yeah, I think first we need an understanding of what we're doing with the delay of the outputs before we can start making those decisions on how to delay the inputs. And once you can get a good, clear output from the PA where you have everything as in phase as you want it to be, and then you can start making those kind of decisions.
Could you quickly explain that concept of delaying the PA to the backline?
Sure.
And how we would measure that?
Sure. So here is we're going to go with like a side to side, just using my hands for visual reference. If this is the guitar amp on the stage and the sound wants to leave the guitar amp and come out here, but the PA is this much ahead of it, the sound comes out and hits you at 2 different times. I want to delay. So now the PA turns on once that distance of the loudest point on the stage. That's why I align my snare and the loudest guitar amp. For Helmet primarily, it's a very loud, heavy rock band. So all the guitars live right in the plane with the snare drum, and I delay my PA to that so I don't have any phase issues there. But I'm not carrying a smart rig, so I have to use what the house has, rely on the house engineer and their knowledge of how to tune that rig, and then just use your ears and what sounds best to you. Yeah, that's decisions you can make at the time, I guess.
Yeah, I must say, I mean, a lot of this stuff is really good if you have a smart rig and understand how to use that and do these tricks if you're fluent on smart. But man, a lot of times I'm just using my ears to do delay times. If I need to delay front fills, I'll often do them by ear.
A metronome for that.
Yeah, or people have different methods, but all this stuff is doable with some experience and practice.
Absolutely.
I'm able to do it via ear, by ear. So, yeah. And then Tyler asked, how would you delay your toms to a spaced pair of overhead mics? Or is it even feasible at all to delay drums to a pair of overheads that aren't XY or RTM?
Question, haven't tried it. could see a few phase issues that you would get with that. So it depends on, like I think Danielle was saying about getting all of the points lined up to the snare or measured to the snare. So it depends on how you have your overheads spaced. So that
Yeah,
would need spacing. Yeah,
I can see it like being perfect for a snare, but then the toms are not equidistant from the overheads. But
yeah, yeah. I've only tried this with ORTF or something similar to human hearing behind the drummer's head for that perspective.
Yeah.
Generally, too, I sort of treat the toms differently, where with the overheads, this is more a studio trick, but sometimes fun live, where you use a ducking technique to really expand the snare, bring in the overheads a bit more when a snare hits to create this huge sense of space. But otherwise, with overheads, it's going to be the clarity information for me. It's going to be the cymbals. It's going to be the smack from the snare, or a little more hi-hat. So I'm not even really focusing on sort of what tom information is coming through, because from the toms I'm looking for kind of more meat, and more kind of lower note information, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, generally I wouldn't go that nuts if I was doing stereo overheads. The other point is, and somebody brought this up, I think I saw RJ there, Glenn Johns is an amazing miking technique, and all those mics are kind of mono equidistant on the kit. Really, a mono overhead or a mono kit mic or something behind the drummer, I find much more success and use for than a true stereo miking setup on the drum overheads.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all kind of what music you're mixing, what you need to get out of the drum sound and all that too. And I mean, that's a good question. And Christian posted in the chat here. I mean, why are people not using XY for drum overheads that much in a live situation? It definitely does give you better phase response, or phase. It solves some phase issues. But I mean, simply put, it's a visual thing. I think for a lot of people, you just don't want these big mic stands and mics hanging out over the drums. You kind of want to clean.
It's funny you mentioned that. I got nixed on an XY setup for that exact reason, because it was kind of in front of the drums, and they were like, you can't.
Yeah. I toured with one drummer who she only wanted like mics under the cymbals. Like she would not have any drum overheads, and it was a visual thing, and I get it. She just wanted to like look out and have it be clear, and you get by. And it was like a rock band, loud, noisy rock band, Slater Kinney, but yeah, she it sounded great, but you had to kind of like EQ the mics more and high pass filter up more, so there wasn't these weird phase things bouncing around. It really just became cymbal mics instead of overhead mics.
Right, and I've done a similar thing for an artist who was new to using in-ears, and they were excited about it. And for the in-ears, they wanted cymbal mics. So that was a situation where I used that and sort of dealt with it at front of house. And you make those concessions depending on the artist you're working for.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, Alex did bring up why he talks about this orchestra stuff. If musicians are physically far apart, and you're close miking them, and there's an inherent delay between the percussion at the back and the strings at the front. And if you mic it all up, everything comes in at the same time, when naturally there's an inherent delay. I've never been in a situation where I'm miking orchestras that much. Have you guys ever got that detailed with big orchestras?
Yeah. Done the close range miking, and have done some large overheads. So in a close range situation, it's all DI type stuff, and those little transducers clipped onto the bridges. Never an issue in that world. And then when it's just a couple stereo pairs of mics sitting around, I mean, it's sound reinforcement, like we said. The orchestra's in a pit, they're playing to the room. My couple microphones are mostly feeding matrices and a little bit of oomph in the room, but really not much.
Yeah. I guess so. One time I've really mixed an orchestra with a rock band. It was just all trying to get them heard. Like was so unconcerned about the phase issues, just trying to get over like a loud, like a quiet string section over a loud drummer 10 feet away from them. Like you get into, it's difficult with a full rock band and orchestra. But yeah, I think definitely if you're getting into like orchestra miking when you really can hear everything clearly, it'd be interesting to play with.
Yeah.
I think we got all the questions. So it's really interesting stuff talking about phase, and it is one of the things I get asked about more than anything. It's like, what is phase? And obviously it's a really tricky question. So thanks guys for some of these tips. But I do want to move on to our next subject, which is understanding the mix, talking about high level, high concept mixing stuff. Danielle, you want to start with this? Maybe talk about just what makes a mix sound good? Like what is it that really like that makes a mix?
Gosh, it's, it's, for me, it's tough to describe, or everybody listen and sort of come up with their own judgments, but it's about learning how to listen critically for me, and for you to decide what makes a mix exciting based on what we've heard. In the club setting, we talked about it, heard you guys talk about it a bit last week, where you want to feel something, where the kick drum is punchy and you can dance to it, where the vocals kind of cut through. It's this translation of energy that I've always loved. So yeah, for me, what makes a mix exciting is a great understanding of the low end and how it sits in the mix. Being able to hear each instrument as it should sit. So if you think about layers on a cake and what instrument kind of goes where, and the biggest one is being able to have lyrical fidelity and hear vocals. And this is a traditional kind of rock pop music kind of setup. But generally just the correct weighting of the frequency spectrum across a mix in terms of instruments. And I love this concept because it's something that we can do while we're home, and something that we can practice while we're not on the road, critically listening to recordings. And, while live sound is different, you could take the similar approach. And I think it's really important to be mindful and to sort of actively listen to music as musicians and as live sound engineers. And I like to start out kind of from easy to hard. So I'll pick a song and chart it out. So be it intro, verse, chorus, or in sections of A, B, C. And then I move into what instruments I can pick out from a recording, and it could be a live recording or a studio kind of thing, and dive in a little bit more. So talk about their fidelity, the snare sounds, the guitar sounds, but again, thinking about where they are in the mix. There are mixes that I've heard where the snare is above everything else and it's loud and proud. Usually it's the vocals on top, and kind of go down from there. Talk about effects, talk about processing of the instruments, and then if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, talk about what key is the song in, and other little bits that can help you translate your mix live.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think really understanding music is important for people. If you're mixing music, understanding the intention of the music. And I think one thing that we were discussing earlier this week is like where instruments fit in the frequency spectrum. And part of that is like, what is this instrument supposed to do? But where what part of the frequency spectrum is it supposed to occupy as well. You know, and I think that's part of what, to me, gives a good mix. If you have all the instruments on stage occupying the parts of the frequency spectrum they're supposed to occupy, and you have a nice full range sound, that could be one thing that kind of contributes to a good sounding full mix. And I know you sent a couple of charts my way. You sent a couple of charts my way showing where the different instruments kind of generally sit in the frequency spectrum. I don't know if we can. I'll share a link with those charts here after in the notes to this video. But
perfect.
Because I don't think we have screen sharing set up. Or maybe I can try to figure this out quickly. But in any case, yeah, where a guitar sits is going to be different than where a tom sits or where a violin sits, and knowing where all those things are supposed to sit in the frequency spectrum really can help you make EQ decisions and especially high pass filter decisions, and I think really kind of help you get a clearer mix. Rubes, do you think a lot about that when you're mixing, just trying to like where stuff's supposed to fit? Like I think about a box always, like where are all the instruments supposed to sit?
Right.
Fun 3D puzzle. And I like Danielle brought up low end, because that's definitely a mystery to us all in a way. Low end reacts, the way low end reacts in a room, because the natural waveform size is just huge. It's really hard to control, and controlling low end has been my major focus in the last year or two. Just trying to understand how to tame low end.
Yeah, so I mean, I think going back to phase aligning inputs, I mean, some of that stuff helps a lot. If you have your two bass mics kind of like really in phase, it can help you keep your more consistent low end instead of them canceling out on some notes or canceling out. I mean, or if I'm using
of energy.
Yeah, or if I'm using two kick drum mics, I'll often just send one of them to the sub and not the other one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is some stuff like that. I think that, and then just aggressive high pass filtering. Like how aggressive do you guys get with your high pass filters?
Depends. I mean, hi-hats go up to about 600, but my toms are only sitting around just beneath the fundamental. All of my shells just beneath the fundamental. Guitars around 100 is a general, and then vocals 120 to 140, vocal dependent, stage dependent, and all that, so on.
Yeah, without diving too much into specific frequencies, but just more to say you're absolutely right. And it's something where I was always taught first with live sound, you know, your high pass filter is your best friend. It will really help to clean up your mix. And it's something that, you know, don't be afraid to touch and to turn. So I use it on a bit of everything, and I'll you know, use it even creatively, right? So it's a filter. Some digital consoles, you have dB per octave options. With our analog disc, it's a 6 dB per octave, and that's just fixed. So it's soft. So I can experiment with kind of getting, you know, a little bit even to a floor tom or a kick drum. And then what I'll do is give a little EQ boost in the low end that I really want to accentuate. And that I've often found helps a ton with kick drum and making it sound really punchy and dancey. But
I've had good luck with that trick too. Like sometimes if on a kick drum, if I high pass it to 50 or something, or to 60 and then boost to a little 80, it can kind of clean it up. I mean, all that stuff is definitely worth experimenting with, you know, when you're mixing.
Right.
So, yeah.
A lot of messy information down in that 20, 30, 40 hertz that the kick drum doesn't need to be shaking up the subwoofers and just rattling the house anyway, unless that's what the band's sound is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course. If it's a bass Nictar show, like an EDM show, you're gonna want as many subs as you can get because that's what it's meant to be. But if we're talking about mixing like live music, like a band on stage, yeah, you're usually not gonna want the subs to be going crazy. And I think that's part of understanding the mix, like the high level thing. You want to stand in a room and hear all parts of the frequency spectrum evenly and balanced, right?
Well, the only time you can stand in a room and hear that is during sound check, and then the people come in, and you can't stand in the room, and what you heard in sound check's irrelevant. So,
oh my gosh, it does. It always changes. But, you know, to take that a step further and say, yes, the frequency spectrum kind of evenly, but, you know, treat that in terms of kind of what sits where. Like, all right, my toms and my bass are kind of over here, and then here's what I'm giving to the guitars, and to make sure what you're giving to the guitars isn't eating away too much of the vocals. And synthesizers are ones that always elude me because they can just do everything.
Mm-hmm. So I do in one of my free video courses have I cut up a Nico case song in a different frequency parts of the frequency spectrum so you can hear the different instruments. So if you are kind of wondering more about this, definitely check that out. It's at theproductionacademy.com. It's our stage course. But yeah, in any case, I think even you can just like you could look at a stage plot input list of a band, and even without hearing the music, kind of get an idea of what might need to be where or what might need to be accentuated, you know, right? I mean, I think another part of understanding the mix is knowing that when an instrument's on stage, or knowing that when an instrument's on stage, it needs to pop out and be heard specifically. And that's part of having it occupy the right part of the frequency spectrum. If you want to be able to move it up and down in the mix, if it's competing with another instrument, it's not going to be as effective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Completely agree. And I did want to touch, I mean, Rubes, something that I've seen you do is how you treat the guitars differently. If it's Billy Bragg, when it's just him and guitar, to still create this full sounding mix, versus Helmet as a full rock band. And you treat it differently because of how many instruments you have that need to occupy different spaces.
That Billy Bragg thing was just an excuse to get more channels. How many more? I needed to get up from 4. I got up to 6 inputs on that one.
I dream big. I love it. I love it.
I'm going to keep taking questions here from the chat. What channels do you guys regularly use low pass filters on? I mean, a lot of consoles don't have low pass filters. I know that it's one of my favorite things about the Digico is just on every channel. Just it's right there. Usually bass DI is my only one that I.
Bass DI or some backup vocals, depending on the need. It's sort of like that trick of kind of tapering off the top of what their top and bottom of what the backup vocalists are saying. You can use your filters to sort of do the same thing that you would have done in the studio.
Yeah, and that's another good thing of understanding where like background vocals fit in a mix. Is you really want to hear them between, say, 250 hertz and 2K or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's it. If you like really do a bandpass filter there, and none of those mics are really meant to be out front, I mean, that can help you put them right in a great place in the mix and not have too much high end bleed or low end bleed or whatever coming through.
Mm-hmm.
But it is
also, you know, helps with sends to the effects. You can make that up with reverb or other spatial effects to where that can have that shimmer at the top without the vocal mic needing to.
Totally.
Sometimes I'll also implement that for the dual miking, the dual source that we were speaking about. Like the DI might have way too much top end, and I will chop that off, but use the body of the ribbon microphone using filters to get the portion of the mic that I like, and then go into the delay thing.
Right. So I guess as we're going through a line check, before we even do this, I mean, because we're talking about stuff that how things fit in a full mix.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just going through a line check process, do you think of things differently, or how do you approach your line check process? Do you anticipate what you're going to need in the show and try to do all your EQs and stuff, or do you generally wait on that until the actual whole mix is coming together?
There's some variables to that question. Am I with the first of 3? Am I with the headliner? Am I at a festival? So where am I when I'm doing this line check? And if we're just going to say I'm with the headline, I'm coming into Bowery Ballroom, I want to make sure everything works. I want to get that preamp works. There's no noise in that signal, a nice healthy gain, so I can keep my fader around unity or as close to as possible. And then minor EQs. I'm not a huge fan of EQ, but obviously use it when you have to. It's a tool. and just touch some stuff up. I wait for the showtime to start digging into the EQs because I don't want to create so much of a linear phase shift right off the bat.
Yeah.
Right. I think exactly that with the line check. I always knock it down to basics. So it's the right instrument and is it tuned properly, and then the right mic and the right mic placement. I'm with Rubes to where I do really save a lot of EQ for the show and trust that my right mic and right mic placement has done enough. But certainly it's also a good time to talk with the headliner about tonal characteristics. And this is where, critical listening can really help. If they say something like boomy or boxy or honky, you have to be able to translate that into what that means for your job in terms of the frequency spectrum and whether or not to boost or cut that or change that so that it sits better for the artist and for your mix.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's another big high level concept is like, you got to understand what the artist wants. What are they trying to put across? And you got to respect that and try to, I mean, after all, our job is to help them get their vision translated to the audience, right? We're just trying to
representing their art.
Yeah, we're trying to get them to get what they need to their audience and assist them with that. So definitely the conversation and understanding, talking with the artist is important, And if you're working in a venue and you see a lot of different people all the time, that's an important skill to the communication, right?
Yeah.
Danielle, you must find that a lot at the Bowery Ballroom. Do you ever have like problems dealing with people who come through and the people are just so insistent on his artistic vision but aren't able to maybe translate it or to describe what they want? Or I guess
absolutely. And I think that it's it's across the board, but certainly you see it a lot day to day at Bowery, just from nature of the club and me being a part of a house team. But that is what helped me to get so good at translating what these words and these terminology mean. When somebody says that they sound too tinny, or it sounds like they're talking into a box, or they want a round bass sound, or something deep or smooth, to be able to have in your arsenal the tools, be it the mic choice, the knowledge to talk somebody through tuning their drums who might not have even known that that's a concept that you could do, to EQ differently or process differently with a little bit more or less compression, or gating is definitely extremely valuable and helpful, and something that I've taken into the touring world and the festival circuit with equal success. And it's through listening to recordings or going online and figuring out what mic somebody used on what guitar amp, or how did the record sound, and does the artist want to be very true to the record, or do we have a little bit of liberty there? No matter what, the general rule is just communicate at all. I've seen too many stubborn sound engineers when I've been touring as front of house that just don't come up and say hello, don't introduce themselves, don't even have that conversation to talk about music or talk about the mix. So I think just having it at all, just going through before you start sound check and talking about loves and hates and things that the artist likes really helps me as somebody who might not have heard the artist before.
Yeah, that's really great advice. That's awesome. it's a social thing, right? Live music, you're getting together with people and doing a show together. That conversation, the communication, it really is important if you're gonna at least just have a good time and have an easy show and have things go smoothly. I think the lack of communication is when things tend to go wrong and the job gets not fun to me. But
completely agree.
Because it's music, it should be fun. It should be like an enjoyment and a fun thing that everybody's doing. You know, it's a work certainly, but it's a job. But I think embracing that kind of funness of it and the positivity of it in general is a good thing. And I think that's definitely just a way to get more work too. If you're an audio engineer, you know, just go be nice to people. And
funny thing happens when you're nice.
I know.
You know, so, well, Jean-Pierre asks, would Rubes mind elaborating how he creates a bigger mix with the solo singer guitar for Billy's thing?
Oh yeah,
and that's again understanding whom you're mixing for and your artist's needs. I mean, when I think of Billy Bragg playing solo guitar, I mean it sounds huge in my head, you know. So if I go to a show, I want his guitar to sound huge.
Yeah. Well, he has acoustic and electric in the show. When he's in acoustic realm, it's just that DI. He will not let a microphone get near his acoustic. He's like, it's not what I'm doing. Doesn't matter. Just let it be the DI. So I needed something to spice it up and make it a little bit more fun. And when he switches to his electric guitar, I've got the Palmer and a SE VR1, I think it's called, the ribbon, the Voodoo series ribbon that they use. And having those two sources, I play with the delay to get the thing that I like, that 10 and 2 with a little bit of steer. So stage perspective, his amp is on stage right of him. So I steer it just the tiniest bit right to give that image of what's coming off of stage, but still a stereo image of the guitar from the two sources and phase. That laced with some effects on his vocals, with the vocals straight down there, gives me much more of this kind of shape to my mix than just a guitar right there.
Yeah.
Which is warranted. The guitar right there is warranted in occasions. His acoustic, it's a folky vibe, so I'm not trying to get all fun spreading guitars out. When he goes electric, it's rock and roll. I get to douse it with reverb and play with some delay.
Yeah. I'll take another question. Do you guys, I guess it's going back to phase to inputs too, but do y'all ever experience triggers changing the way you mix acoustic drums live, phase and or frequency wise? Have you guys ever used drum triggers?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have, and I have had great success with them, honestly. Especially like in arenas and stuff, they can sound really good. I've just kind of knocked the triggers back a couple milliseconds, usually.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do it by ear. I'll usually like have a virtual sound check and play them back and just kind of go back and listen to them. But I'll usually
the first step is delaying it to that, because they're always going to be 5 to 10 milliseconds, even upwards of 20 in some processors occasions. Delaying for sure.
Yeah. We also have a question. Do you guys use cascaded compressor? Are you guys using cascaded compressors at all? From Christian. I actually don't know what that means. Christian, can you elaborate a little bit, please? And from Tim, when communicating with the band, do you get the primary information from the band leader, and mainly what do the others want in their monitors? So yeah, I guess dealing with monitors is a whole separate thing when you're talking with a band and figuring out what they need. I think communication is especially really important if you're mixing monitors, and introducing yourself and developing a rapport with a band that you're trying to help out and get their stage sound dialed in. I mean, to me, that's like communication is the thing really with
Yeah.
wedges.
And with that said, communication between monitors and the front of house engineer, because there's often times where someone will take something through their wedge, and at front of house, I'm like, I have got to get rid of that 200 hertz right now. This can't happen. Like, so you got to dial up and make sure that you're talking. And there's ways that the monitor engineer can then communicate to the person who's wedge we're adjusting for a front of house reason, and if they will be reciprocate to that.
So Danielle, you have a good team over at Bowery. Do you think about when you're hiring engineers about some of these things, communication stuff?
Oh, those guys are the best. But absolutely, I think that that's kind of first and foremost the technical stuff. Our size venue is a great place to learn. And I was thrilled that we were finally able to get a digital console at Monitors, which was a huge upgrade for us. So yes, I still love digital. I still think that there's a great place for it. But Midas console for a while now at front of house. But that's one of the first things I look for when I'm hiring somebody is communication with me when they're going on the interview, but the band, and do they have musical knowledge themselves? The best engineers do have a musical proficiency, or at least a love for it, to talk the language. And yeah, we make sure that that's sort of drilled in. At our club, it's fortunately or not, they're in a position where they can't leave the stage. There's no access from Monitors out to the crowd. So they're stuck on there with the musicians, for better or for worse. But I do find that, that communication really helps. Going back to, to phase alignment, that's, something as well, where I work hand in hand with a monitor engineer, where I might ask that they flip something going into the wedge to help me out at front of house. And I find that lower mid-range really cleans up for me if they do so.
Yeah, so brass tacks, how do you get communicating back and forth? Do you use ClearComm, or
we do have a ClearComm system. We have walkie-talkies as well. Generally, though, just right before sound check, it'll be 3 of us on stage with the band. So the stage manager, a monitor engineer, and myself, and we'll all go through, talk us through the mix a little bit, talk us through what your synthesizers are doing, talk us through what you like and you don't like in the wedge. And we'll have that conversation as a team, so everybody gets the same information at the same time. And then we'll kind of go from there back to our zones. And I'll usually call out the line check. I'll start with the instruments, and the monitor engineer follows me.
Cool. So Christian did clarify his question. Is using one compressor and then another one, maybe with like a fast attack and then a slower one.
All the time.
Yeah, I what I do a lot is like a de-esser or a multi-band compressor, and then a general overall compressor at like a slow, low ratio sort of thing. And as far as, every circuit adds latency. So, it depends on what console you're on, if you can actually tell how much latency each of those circuits is taking up, or if you're doing something as a plug-in.
I've met guys that do all that math and then they plug it in, and the console does some, but you can time align everything even better if you want. It's not something I've dove into yet.
Yeah, I do on the Avid consoles. I know how to see how many samples each plugin is taking and delay all the channels. And if I'm on tour with the band and carrying a console and have the same thing, 60 channels, and go, I do go through and delay this channel by 8 samples, and it's like 0.2 milliseconds, whatever. But you have to be able to tell how much latency the circuit is giving you, and most consoles don't really do that. But and a lot of them do have a lot of this phase coherency stuff built in. Like I think on some consoles, if you are putting in EQs or compressors on the outputs, one of the outputs, and it takes how many tiny bit of latency,
all
it
of
will
them.
delay the other outputs. It will keep all the outputs phase lined, I believe.
Right.
Some consoles I'm sure don't, but I think the like more expensive ones do. I doubt there's a lot of that type of stuff built into like the really entry level digital consoles, but let's see, anything else you guys want to talk about here with like kind of big picture stuff, kind of really what makes a mix good? What is it?
We're all still trying to figure that out, right?
It's so subjective, right? But I think Danielle, your
Um,
point of like wanting to feel something, I think is important for a lot of sound engineers. You know, you can listen to music and you can turn up in headphones and feel something. But you know, if you're live, you can feel those speakers moving, feel the air moving. It can be really satisfying.
Yeah.
right. It's, it's the difference between a rehearsal and the show. It's, you might still be able to hear everybody in your band's practice space or in a, orchestral rehearsal room, but it's something about how to use sound reinforcement to affect that emotional response to the music. We're taught, in pop and in dance and even in rock, that the kick drum holds a lot of weight, the snare holds a lot of weight, to first be able to relate to the rhythm. And then we get to the melodic stuff. So that's really helpful. I think that's why you see so many engineers spending a ton of time on the drums. Not only does it have a ton of mics on it, and again, going through and aligning them all, making sure they're all speaking well together. But it is a huge, important part of the mix. Something else I wanted to bring up too, that folks can just download and have fun with while we're still stuck at home, is the QuizTones app or the Sound Gym app, which train you on, QuizTones does exactly that. It trains you on finding tones. So if you want to be a monitor engineer, finding feedback frequencies or figuring out what's been done to a particular track, be it extra compression or a certain EQ that's boosted or cut. And those are all great tools that'll help you when you're moving fast to create your mix.
Yeah. Great.
But I think don't go ahead.
No, we'll put links to all this stuff in the notes here, because when I send you the link for the replay, that'll send you to a page that has all these links on there. So we definitely want to give you good resources right now. It's important to keep yourself active and thinking about this stuff while we're not working. But even just listening to music is good, like we were talking about. But definitely these apps are great tools just to tune your ears up and kind of keep sharp with it. And so Tim asks, when mixing a band with one console for both front of house and wedges, do you get the sound on the stage right with the PA off, and then so everyone's on the stage is happy, and then start with the PA, or how do you do it? And this kind of goes into workflow stuff, and it gets tricky, and I think it's different with every situation, really. But
yeah. I do start with duplicating the inputs anyway, so that my vocals or anything.
Yes, that's huge.
Having duplicate inputs. I'll even go so far as to having an input that goes to wedges and then an input that goes to ears. With Page and with Helmet, he doesn't want his vocal high passed anywhere over 90, and he can hear it. So I have a different channel for that one that goes into his in-ears that's different than the one that goes into the wedges and so forth. So that's the first thing I do there. And
Tim, I did make a blog post about this last week, so check that out at theproductionacademy.com on the blog. There is a way to kind of split your vocal channels using an analog Y split instead of actually duplicating channels on a console. And I go into the Y. That's a good thing to do, but absolutely, I think you do need to focus on stage sound to get your singers happy, especially your singers happy. And being able to have those two different channels really lets you focus on that a bit, and then not have to totally be screwed on front of house if you don't have if you have it right for the wedges but not for front of house, because they, especially with the vocal mics, the lead vocal mics, it's quite often they need to be different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then I also want to add that you're likely in a small to medium sized club format if you are having to do that. So I do like to do both sort of roughly at the same time. I mean, you do want the wedges or the ears done first. You want them to hear themselves from their source, but then I will bring up the house so that they can hear what is going to be a bit closer to the show. And if there are terrible reflections from the room, from the main PA, to kind of deal with that, or just to get them used to playing in a space together and what we have to do to overcome that or enhance that.
Yeah. Totally. So James asks, can you speak to situations where you might want to unity mix versus gaining with the faders down and then bringing them up? I think this kind of gets into technique and how you line check really, and how your gain structure is set up. I mean, if your gains are set right and your faders are all about unity, and it should be all your outputs are at unity and everything's the right volume. I mean, that's kind of ideal, but obviously not always that way.
Yeah, that's how I start too.
Yeah, I mean,
hello. My dog is doing
oh, hey buddy.
Oh, hey.
But no, I've seen different people do this differently. Some people will want all their faders at unity and run the gain kind of low, and then but to me that doesn't make sense, because I feel like for your compressors and your insert points to really work well, all your dynamics processors, you really just need that solid gain first. Even if something, and again, this is how I do it, but not everyone does it this way, but I will say like gain my hi-hat up more than most people and then ride the fader lower than unity to keep it in the mix. But I feel like I get a better hi-hat sound if I'm crunching that gain up, getting a good response on that gain. And then I sometimes use like a little multi-band compressor to tame down the highs on the hi-hat or whatever. But all that stuff is going to work better if the gain structure is right at the top. The very first thing you hit your mic preamp, if you get a good volume there, I feel like the faders can kind of live wherever. But
I'm a little different, and I think it comes from not regularly touring with a console, or having the same band for longer periods. More recently, to where I will put the faders at unity, just to know that I'll have the most control over the sound, and then gain up. And I'll gain up to where I want it to sound. So like you said with a hi-hat, if you get a little more meat, I'll gain up to that too, and then maybe tuck the fader down. But I feel like I get more control with the faders if I start with them at unity and then gain into that.
Rubes, what's your approach? Do you usually have all your faders at unity when you're mixing?
I'm a faders at unity guy. Like gain, much like a fader, is logarithmic and not linear. And each gain stage of the head amp, you're going to have different reaction EQ wise for the source. And I found that just starting at getting that fader to unity, getting the preamp to the spot that puts that in the right sonic placement of the mix, that's had success for me. But that's starting in an analog world too. I hear it doesn't make as much of a difference in the digital desks, but
well, I mean, it is an important point. I mean, I used to have a recording studio in Chicago. It was all analog, and that's what we'd always do, because those analog faders sound best at unity. I mean, that's just the nature of the physical fader of what it is.
Yeah,
it's not necessarily true with digital. It's not like the fader is going to sound better at unity than it does at -6 or whatever. And
it is going to give you the most attenuation, but
yeah. And then also with the digital consoles, if you're you hit the mic pre first, you hit the preamp, and then it immediately goes into a analog to digital converter. So if you get better resolution, if it's a hotter signal coming in, the A to D converter gets a little bit better resolution. But again, there's different ways of doing this, and really, I've seen a lot of people do it a lot of different ways. So it's a matter of developing your own technique, finding what works for you, and that's how a lot of us do it.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of mixes a little differently, has their own style and their own techniques. So, I mean, there are just general overall things that we all have to think about, but the nitty gritty, they're doing it at the show, however you manage the console. People like to do it different ways, right?
Right. I think that there are so many wonderful and beautiful ways to come up with the same idea, the same exciting mix, or the same solution to a problem. But it comes with good ears first, right? So it comes with deciding how you like your snare, or how you like your guitars to speak, or what you like or don't about vocals.
Yeah. Christian did note in the chat here, Robert Scoville explained a great solution to the faders at unity problem if you want to keep your faders at unity and lower the volume via subgroups. Actually, I think he was talking about using VCAs to control.
Right.
His thing is to use VCAs to control all the outputs and stuff. The workflow gets complicated with some of that stuff. I think his approach is good. I do that when I'm touring, but a lot of times using VCAs to control your outputs, or that's not really going to be something you're doing just rolling in and doing a show.
Right.
It does. Sorry, go ahead, Danielle.
No. I was going to say I use them on inputs. Again, speaking to phase, if I find the perfect balance between a kick in and a kick out, I'll keep my faders where they are and throw them on a VCA so that level relative to both mics stays the same, but their overall level of the kick drum moves up and down.
Yeah.
It can also help with your parallel compression. I use a VCA, like the entire drum set can be pushed into the compressor on that drum bus. So using the VCA, I can increase compression on that. Into that bus. That's a fun way to use that.
Yeah, I mean, VCAs are super helpful, especially if you get into some of these advanced digital consoles now where you can have 80 VCAs or whatever.
I know.
You're really using control your whole show. I mean, I definitely use them a lot when I'm mixing, especially if you're getting up more than 20 or 30 inputs. You really want to kind of consolidate your workflow to like less area, less faders. So yeah, the VCAs definitely get helpful. I also have seen someone get kind of screwed over by using the VCAs on the output. Like Scoville suggested, there was a VCA buried deep in their file somewhere. Somehow went down. It cut out their whole show for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and it was a rough one. It's hard to see, but
it's a long 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And it was arena. There was like 15,000 people there. It was like kind of.
Oh God.
But it does happen. Again, some of these advanced workflow stuff. It's better if you're carrying your own console and you're like have a week of pre-production with a band, rehearsals, figuring out all this stuff and getting it all dialed in and knowing exactly where every bit of your file is. But especially if you're working for a band for the first time or on a console that you're not usually using a lot. Sometimes it's better just to keep it simple, right?
Yeah, in that environment.
Yeah, start with the theories. Start with your ears. They're all stuff you know how to do. Measure out drum mics, or use your ears to where the fills sound good. Move a mic around.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think at the end of the day, any good engineer can walk in and not do any of this like really advanced stuff that we're talking about and get a decent mix going, right? I mean, we can all do that, and we can do that because we've mixed a lot of shows and we have the experience our ears know what should be going up or down, and we kind of have a sense of where vocals should be. And I think, going back to understanding a mix and high level concepts, I mean, it is really simple. A lot of times you want to hear what's on stage. If something on stage is the focus of the mix, you want to turn it up, and in a lot of situations that's going to be fine. But what we're talking about with all this advanced time alignment stuff and advanced workflows and stuff, it really is that kind of extra 10%, I think, that like brings it all together, brings the mix together.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, the use of a great effect, that like the back of your hand that you can put on something, or your favorite compressor, but knowing how to do it, correctly and in the right application. And that's where you can start to have some fun.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about what song you guys used to tune a PA, and why you like using that song, and what your technique is generally if you're playing a song and walking around a room. Or Rubes, why don't you start?
All right, I start. First song is the Beatles' "Come Together," and it shows me a couple things. The drums are panned off and the guitars are over here, so I know everything's kind of working in that regard. But also it shows you how wretched a room can really be, that particular mix. It'll show off a lot of boomy low end that you don't want and some just shredding the top of your ears type of stuff. So that'll initially tell me what kind of day I'm about to have. The second song, I then go into Portishead. No, I'm completely spacing on the song title. I just got a song too. A Portishead song that is.
Is it Rhodes?
It's why can I not think of the name right now? I'll find it. But that shows me a lot of honkiness, a lot of 200 to 630 1K range. That just sticks out like crazy in that mix. And I think it's really impactful and otherwise smooth mix. So I like those two songs first.
Yeah, it is great when you have a song that you know so well what part of the frequency spectrum it brings out, or what part it enhances, so you know, like, all right, this song, if I'm gonna like deal with the low mid in a room, this song's gonna help me do it. And
Wandering Star, that's the title.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, Danielle, what do you use?
My go-to for the past year or so has been Paul Simon, Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. And it was a trick I got from a pal of mine who did front of house for a tour that we were on together. And it's great because it starts out just vocals at the top, but there's a full spectrum. It's almost like a big choir at the start. So I use that to kind of really dial in and see what the subs are doing and how much power do they have, versus how much do I want them to have? Do I want it to really be that punchy sub bass, or can I give them a little bit in the 150, 200 range? So I'll make some low end decisions based on the start of that song, and then also when the drums come in, because that kick drum is so present and punchy. So I'll really feel what the subs are doing there. There's great panning with the horns in that song. It's got guitars, it's got keys. I can tell and gauge the vocal range based on how Paul Simon's voice speaks through the PA. It's already sort of a little honky, but if that gets emphasized, I'll know I'll need to make some cuts. Rubes brought up Portishead. I used to use Rhodes, that had this amazing actual Rhodes intro at the start. So that one was great. But yeah, I found that I could get into a good place if I just had one song with that Paul Simon song. There's also I don't love, it's a good critical album because I don't have such an emotional attachment to it.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, we're going to have a Spotify playlist with the songs that you all mentioned in the chat earlier. And so,
what do people bring up? What do we got?
Oh, let's see. I got to scroll all the way to the top here and then let's see. We got Love Me, the 1975. We got Get Lucky, Daft Punk. Hella Good, No Doubt. Don't Care Anymore, Phil Collins. Iron Fairy, Goddess of Love. Tom Petty, You Don't Know How It Feels. Sade, Hang On to Your Love. Fleetwood Mac, Dreams. Tool song, Stink Fist. I don't know that one. Gregory Isaacs. Okay, so we got a bunch here. So the Descendants.
Nice, yeah.
Interesting. We got a Ween one. Mac DeMarco, Radiohead, Peter Gabriel. Yeah. So again, obviously it's good to have a song you know really well to kind of use to know what you're hearing. If you like play a song, like you were saying, if you know the subs are reacting a certain way to that song that you know well, you'll know what to do to kind of watch out for them or to tame them or make some EQ cuts or whatever. So that's great. But we will get that list. You'll at least be able to see what everybody else is using And I'll send that. I'll put that in a link to in the show notes or in the notes to this video. So,
Cool.
hey guys, thanks so much for coming by and talking with me here and sharing
Thanks
all
for
your
having me.
sharing all your expertise.
Thanks for setting this up.
So cool. And like I said, I'll be sending out a link tomorrow for the replay. Thanks for everybody for coming. And we'll see you on the next one next week. All right.
Sounds good. Take care.
Bye guys.